Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone, and welcome to a series on this channel where I am gonna be reviewing characters from Genshin Impact. I have been playing the game since the start of the year, and I have accumulated a lot of opinions for many of the characters that I have acquired. Because, this is a gacha game, you can't get every character unless you whale or you're very lucky. But still, I have gotten a lot of characters and I have built a lot of opinions for them since I have also tried everyone. And I really wanted to make this sort of series where I dive into each and everyone. Every single video is gonna be a character and talk about my opinions on them. This isn't necessarily a guide, although I will mention artifact sets and weapons that do go together with characters and how they change gameplay and such, and the roles that a character can fulfill. Some other things that I want to clarify: whenever I mention talents, I'm not referring to the skills. I'm mentioning the ascension talents, because I like to call the elemental skill a skill or ability, and the elemental burst I usually call an ultimate, because Dota and League of Legends have done that to me. So whenever you hear me call something an ult, that means that's the burst of a character, and ability or skill is the elemental skill. Okay, and talents is the extra ascension talents that you get, the passive ones. So let's begin, and where to begin then? Of course, the main character themselves, the Traveler. We'll be looking at both the Anemo and Geo version in this video, so this one might be a bit big, a bit longer than the other ones. And yeah, let's get right into it. Let's start off with the Traveler's auto attacks. Pretty standard. Nothing special about these auto attacks compared to other sword users. The Traveler doesn't have any sort of teleporting or blinking auto attack that is usually part of the chain. And yeah, that's primarily it. Nothing crazy about the auto attacks. They do get buffed by constellations and talents, I think. They add some sort of elemental attack at the end as of now, and that's cool. Let's move on then to the meat of the character, the elemental skill and burst. So the elemental skill is this Palm Vortex, as it's called. It's a pretty good skill, especially for early game, and it's good with the ascensions, with the talents and the constellations. You do get a bit of sucking power, let's say, some pulling power to it, although it's not that crazy. I mean, it's not a burst, so it's not like Venti. Venti is the most broken character because he has that incredible ultimate that just pulls everyone in. Sucros as well can do that, but the Traveler also is pretty okay. Since you're also melee, you're not ranged, you will get up and close with enemies, so you will most likely just pull a few of them together. Of course, it doesn't work on pretty big enemies, but it's still cool. You can also infuse it with elements. If you have an enemy that gets affected by the vortex, if they have an element on them, it will get infused and deal extra damage, which is pretty cool. If you have some other ability that can deal deal elemental damage and proc some reactions as you're using the vortex, that's gonna be cool because you're also gonna be proccing those reactions. So pretty good ability. Low cooldown as well, so that's really good. And yeah, nice, good damage, pretty cool. Let's move on then. On to the burst, the ultimate of the Anemo MC. This is a tornado. It's just a tornado that moves pretty quickly, and it's a really good ability, I will have to say. A really good burst, especially for like a character that is given to you for absolutely free. It can be infused with elements, as with every other Anemo ability, but it is a bit hard to infuse. The tornado travels really quickly, so you will need to apply an element to an enemy before using the tornado, or perhaps if you can get a ranged character to hit the tornado and then infuse it, although you might be losing in a bit of elemental damage if you decide to infuse the tornado after you fire it. Of course, there's auto-targeting, so do be careful where you throw that tornado, because, yeah, I mean, that's how Genshin works. I should have a bit of a background video, by the way, of me trying to infuse the tornado with Diluc, and you'll see that even with, like, nobody around me, characters will try to lock on enemies on the tornado, so you will literally miss it. It's annoying. So, and it's just tricky, actually, not annoying necessarily. It's just tricky to infuse the tornado after using it And yeah, I mean, that's the main problem of it. In general, though, it's really good. It groups up enemies really well. It's got really good pulling power. So it's just really good. And then it moves it moves enemies towards a direction. So you'll group them up, you'll move them towards a direction that you want them to go. Preferably if there are like enemies on one side of an arena and another side, you'll go to one side, group those enemies up with the tornado, and then fire them towards the other enemies, and then you'll be easily able to clear all of them without losing any time. What makes this ability, though, incredible, is the 6th constellation of the Anemo Traveler, which you'll get for free. And with the specifically for this video, for the Traveler, we'll be talking about a few constellations because you'll get them for free compared to regular characters. But yeah, the sixth constellation of the Traveler is that whenever you infuse the tornado with an element, you will reduce the enemy's resistance to that element by a good amount. Now, I haven't necessarily tested it exactly, but I would guess that it's for a duration. This resistance reduction is for a certain duration, not just for as long as the enemy is on the tornado, But yeah, like, resistance reduction in Genshin Impact is incredibly useful. Its scaling is just too good to pass up. So compared to something like a physical resistance reduction, or like dropping an enemy's def, or increasing your own damage, dropping an enemy's elemental resistance is just busted. So with this, you're actually getting a mini Venti, like a budget Venti on you, because that's why people really love Venti, and that's why he's so powerful. He has his pulling power, but he also reduces the enemy's resistances, and you get this for free with the Traveler, and it's incredible. Just that, it's incredible. Couple it up with Viridescent, the artifact set, a 4-piece Viridescent, and you're reducing their resistances even more, because it stacks. Plus, you'll be upping your swirl damage with Viridescent, and it's just broken. I mean, it's really good. And yeah, I mean, incredible, just that. So, what roles can the Traveler fulfill in a party? Well, they can actually be a sort of physical DPS, although you will be like ignoring part of the character's abilities. The physical DPS actually fits more into the Geo version, I would say, because for the Anemo version, it fit like a role of an elemental sub DPS or an elemental support. I think that's a much better approach to this character. And there are a lot of artifacts that you can use in order to fulfill those roles. Specifically, you can go for something like a early game, actually. So, early game, the 5-star artifacts that you will mostly be getting from something like bosses or like adventure ranks and such is something like the Gladiator set and the Wanderer set. So we'll focus more on those sets when we're talking about early game. And yeah, for early game, 2-piece Gladiator, 2-piece Wanderer, the Elemental Mastery from Wanderer's Troop or Troupe is really good for swirl damage, and 2-piece Gladiator because everything scales with attack. Now for above rank 45, which is where the grind starts, for the Elemental sub DPS and support, I think that a 4-piece Viridescent is really the best you can do. You can sort of mix and match. You can go for a 2-piece Viridescent to have that Anemo damage, and then you can bring in something like a 2-piece Wanderer to get the extra Elemental Mastery, and with the 1.6 Elemental Mastery buffs, you might actually see some really good damage on that swirl, although with the 4-piece Viridescent, you are just increasing swirl damage just like that, like what is it, like a 40% increase in swirl damage, and I think that really doesn't compare to 80 Elemental Mastery. It's the Elemental Mastery, I think it's just weaker than the swirl damage, the raw swirl damage. If you want to be even to have the Traveler as an even more support character, you could go to the Noblesse artifact set. 2-piece to increase the burst damage, and then a 4-piece to increase your party's attack when you cast the burst. But that will, you can say that I won't go for the 4-piece Viridescent because I'm already shredding enemies' resistance, and I don't care about the swirl damage, I don't care about the ult's damage, I just want to buff my party, and group enemies. So you could go for the Noblesse artifact set if that is what you're thinking. If the Traveler is like position 3 or position 4 support. As for weapons for the Anemo Traveler, as we said, the roles the Anemo Traveler mainly is mainly used at is an elemental sub DPS or support. And there is a pretty wide selection of weapons you can use. Right, you have a lot of choices. I wouldn't really use something that gives that has an attack stat, attack percent main stat bonus, because it's mostly an elemental elemental DPS on swirl, not like Anemo, raw Anemo damage, compared to somebody like Xiao. Xiao is more Anemo focused than swirl focused. While the Traveler is more swirl focused, so just giving attack to the character isn't really the best. And attack weapons, like weapons that have an attack substat, their effects aren't that good compared to the Favonius Sword, which gives energy recharge, so more ultimates, and its effect is all about generating energy, so you will be generating energy for the Traveler and your party as well. So Favonius Sword, really good choice. Iron Sting, the complete free-to-play weapon because you can craft it using the prototypes, the billets, and really good elemental mastery, so lots of swirl damage bonus there, and its effect increases your overall damage when you deal elemental damage. And with how the Traveler's abilities work, where they deal like instances of damage back to back instead of being a one and done situation, you will stack it immediately with just using your skill or ultimate. So you will increase all of your damage by 12% for 6 seconds, which is incredibly good, and good base attack. Other weapons, the Sacrificial Sword does exist. It gives energy recharge, but its effect is really lost on the Anemo Traveler. You don't need the reset on the skill. The cooldown is really small anyway, so I don't think it's really needed. Give the Sacrificial Sword to Xingqiu or some other sword character that really needs the cooldown reset. There's also the Alley Flash. Now, the Alley Flash has an absurd amount of base attack. It even rivals freaking 5 stars on its base attack. But it gives a really, really low amount of elemental mastery. Just a really low amount. Its effect actually just increases all of your damage by 12%, but if you take damage, you lose it. So it's an Iron Sting that is always on, but I think it's a bit worse. Yes, the base attack is awesome, but the much lower elemental mastery it gives just doesn't cut it. It really, really makes this weapon, drops this weapon down in the ratings. Other weapons, if you have been playing since the very beginning and you have Festering Desire and you don't have someone like Albedo because it's based in slot weapon, you could use it on the Traveler. The elemental skill damage and crit rate is pretty useful for a sub DPS build. And the Vortex, the Palm Vortex, the skill will be dealing a lot of damage, and the energy recharge is pretty nice to spam the ultimates. As for 5 stars, if you, I guess, have some extra 5 stars you want to give to the support or sub DPS character, well, for the Traveler, the Skyward Blade is pretty good. Nice energy recharge, and its effect is just amazing. Just incredible for the character. Energy recharge is really good base attack. And again, the effect, the buff when using the elemental burst is pretty good. Like, just really awesome. And the other really 5-star you can use is the Freedom Sworn. If you don't have Kazuha and you don't use or you have any extra Freedom Sworns, it's pretty good. I would say, yeah, it's incredibly good. The weapon was built for an Anemo character, so it would of course fit into another Anemo character. So yeah, that's that for weapons that fit the Anemo character, the Anemo Traveler. And that is really mostly for the Anemo Traveler. Really good elemental damage. And the Anemo Traveler has something that really matters in Genshin Impact, and that is enemy movement manipulation, where they can do what they want with the enemies. They can move them where they want, they can group them up as they wish in order for the main DPS to just go ham with their AoE skills and kill the enemies together so that you maximize your time. They are really good at that job. But we will talk about something in the very end that will sort of justify why you don't see many people using the Traveler. But let's move on to the Geo Traveler, the Geo version. We'll be getting an Electro version very soon. Inazuma is very close, but that will be a separate video, of course. So the Geo Traveler has the same attack pattern as the Anemo Traveler, nothing crazy, so moving on then. We go on to the elemental skill, which is the sword thing. I like how it's called a sword, but it's just a fucking rock. So it's a sort of mini meteorite. What's interesting though about this skill, before we get into numbers, I guess, and such, is that if you tap the skill, the meteorite drops from above, but if you hold it, it emerges from the ground. So what the fuck is up with that? What is up with that? But this skill is good. It's pretty basic compared to the Anemo Traveler. Of course, you don't have the absorption of enemies. You don't have sort of constant damage, but this ability has some really crazy numbers. Its scaling on damage is absurd. And with the talents and constellations, you reduce the cooldown so long. It's such a low cooldown because of the constellations and talents that you just spam it and you're dealing so much damage with it. It's sad that it's a Geo, so it can't proc a damage focused reaction, overload, everything else really, because Crystallize is the only reaction that doesn't deal damage. And yeah, and up until now, the Traveler has been a really supporty type of character because of these because the only two elements he has is Anemo and Geo, and they're both support elements because they don't have very damage heavy reactions on them. But nevertheless, the skill is pretty good. Low cooldown because of constellations and talents. You're just dropping like 4. You can have up to 4 like rocks, 4 like meteorites on the ground, and it's crazy. You can like use them for plunging attack, but you're mostly gonna do that in like the overworld, not really in something like the abyss. Because climbing on the rock and then jumping off to do the plunging attack, I think it's like a loss of DPS and time. But still, really good. It also, of course, is a Geo construct, so it does work with Zhongli's pillar, so it will resonate and deal damage. Then we move on to the ultimate of the Geo Traveler. The Geo Traveler just like fucking punches the ground and does these shockwaves that then at the end create like 4 walls that aren't connected with each other. Actually, they have like clear gaps between them. It's pretty good. It's okay. What matters is that this ability, it's the first constellation of the Geo Traveler, makes it so that characters within this within the field, within the walls, will have their crit rate raised, which is massive. And because of the 4th constellation, whenever you hit an enemy with the ultimate, you generate energy back, so you can really spam the ability and have an 100% uptime on it, so you have a permanent crit rate buff. The problem is, you don't know that. You can't know if you have the... Well, you know that you are within the walls, but there isn't some sort of buff icon, nor any sort of effect around your character to know you are buffed with a crit rate buff, which is very interesting. Like, it sort of seems like a bug or just missing in general. So, MiHoYo, please fix that. Like, please have something show that you are getting the crit rate bonus, because it's really weird. And yeah, I mean, the 6th constellation just increases its duration, so that's pretty good. It helps with the 100% uptime. The more time the walls are up, the more crit rate time you have. And yeah, pretty solid kit. The Geo Traveler is more of a interesting character compared to Anemo, whereas Anemo is really good at manipulating enemies, grouping them up, dealing some good swirl damage. The Geo version is mostly about spamming, really. You spam the sword, you spam the ultimate, and that's your damage that's your Geo damage. Yeah, and that's okay, it's pretty good, but people do prefer the Anemo Traveler, especially because there aren't, like, compared to Viridescent and what it can do with the Anemo Traveler, there aren't like artifact sets for Geo characters that can fulfill that role for the Geo Traveler. But what role can the Geo Traveler fulfill? Well, this is where I said, where we mentioned the physical damage build for the Geo Traveler, because you'll be like throwing down the meteorites and such. That is cool, but with the ultimate's crit rate buff, it's much better on a physical build compared to the Anemo. The Anemo doesn't buff auto attacks at all, so with the crit rate buff, you can deal some pretty good auto attack hits, and it helps with like artifact farming. If you don't have the best crit rate, if you get at least 40-45%, or if you get a normal crit rate like 50 plus, the buff is just too good to pass, and you'll be dealing some really good crits with the crit rate buff. It doesn't buff crit damage, but you can you can focus your artifacts on crit damage instead of crit rate, because you have that crit rate buff almost always up. And again, that's where the physical build comes in, because physical builds are all auto attacks and the crit rate just helps immensely. You can also get the Geo Traveler to be a sort of elemental support. I don't know about an elemental sub DPS, because again, your DPS is just Geo. It's Geo, so again, no swirl, no other reaction, just crystallize, which doesn't deal any extra damage, and you're just spamming the E and the skill and the burst, and that's your damage. Again, it doesn't really fit a sub DPS role that much. As a support, though, yes. You are spamming the skill, that's good. You are creating the Geo constructs, which can also tank some hits. But the crit rate, of course, and the 100% uptime on that crit rate buff is just really good for a support. You can go for something like for early game, once you get the Geo Traveler, you can go for like a 4-piece Gladiator, really, just a 18% attack and then just auto attacks, because that's what you're gonna be doing early game. It doesn't really matter. You don't really need to maximize your damage in early game before AR-45. We all know that. But for late game, if you want to focus on the physical damage, then you can go for something like a double play, 2 Pale Flame, 2 Bloodstained for 50% physical damage. You could perhaps go a 4-piece Pale Flame, because the Meteorite has a really low cooldown, so you might be able to keep the Pale Flame buff up and have yourself extra attack and the 50% physical damage bonus. So, it's just the Pale Flame 4-piece set. It's not consistent, and that inconsistency just throws people off, and rightfully so. So that's why people usually go for something like a 2-piece Pale Flame and a 2-piece Bloodstain, so that they can have the 50% physical damage bonus always up. If you want to go for a more supporting build, then the Noblesse set is really what you should go for. You can go for something like a 2-piece Noblesse to buff your burst damage, and then go for a 2-piece Archaic to buff your geo damage. So then you're sort of like going 75% focus of the artifacts on the burst, and then a 25% focus on the skill itself, because the geo damage buffs both the burst and the skill, and then Noblesse buffs only the burst. Or if you want to just have them as a position 3, position 4 support, only support, then you're gonna go for something like a 4-piece Noblesse, because you're gonna buff your burst damage, you're gonna be dealing some good damage there, but then you're also gonna be buffing your party's attack, because you're spamming the burst continuously, and crit rate. So it's a permanent attack and crit rate buff. And I think that's really the best way really to use the Geo Traveler. Let's get into some weapons then for the Geo Traveler. Well, since we have the physical attack, the physical damage build available to us, the prototype Rancor, which can be crafted, so it's completely free to play and refinement free, let's say, is, well, the best in slot even, I would say, when it comes to, 4 stars. Because other swords, which I mentioned in the Anemo Traveler weapons, they're mostly for support and, elemental DPSs. Energy recharge, elemental mastery, you don't want that on your physical DPS. The black sword actually is pretty good. It gives crit rate, so if your artifacts aren't that good, you don't have the best balance, you could use it. Although, as we mentioned, the burst does have that crit rate buff, so perhaps you might want to skip on the black sword, because you already have a crit rate buff, and you should have plenty of crit rate even without the black sword. And its base attack is a bit underwhelming for a DPS focused weapon, so I would say skip on that. Use the prototype Rancor. It's a good base attack 44. That's really high actually, and it has a physical damage bonus, so that is what you need. You could use the Black Cliff Longsword, so that you have the crit rate buff from the ultimate. You should search for some crit rate artifacts, of course, and then the Black Cliff Longsword gives you crit damage, good base attack, and its effect is pretty good, especially if you're like the main DPS. The Traveler is working as the main physical DPS, position 1. He should be the one. They should be the one getting the kills, so the effect will start stacking. So Black Cliff Longsword, pretty good if you have the Star Glitter to spare. Otherwise, I think the Prototype Rancor is the best option. Compared to even other like gacha 4 stars, I seriously think the Prototype Rancor, which again is completely free, is the best option. For 5 stars, I mean, Aquila Favonia, of course, best base attack everywhere, physical damage bonus, its effect is just really good, some sustainability because of the heal, 20% attack increase, it's just perfect for a physical damage build. And then, the Primordial Jade Cutter, use it if you have it, or if another character doesn't need it, use it. Compared to the Prototype Rancor, it's a 5-star sword, and it's much better than the Prototype Rancor. They have the same base attack, but I think that getting the crit rate is nice. Again, even if you have the crit rate buff, you could literally just skip all. Actually, the Primordial Jade Cutter is the one exception compared to the Black Sword, because it gives 44% crit rate, and because characters have a 5% base crit rate, you're literally getting 49% crit rate. Using the crit rate buff from the ult, you have 60% crit rate. Just like that, without any artifacts. So you can just go crazy on crit damage artifacts and still be good. Like, the Primordial Jade Cutter is one of the most busted weapons of any out there. So yeah, and its effect is just, it's Staff of Homa on a sword. So I think for a physical damage build, broken. I mean, the weapon itself is broken, so yeah. If you have Aquila Favonia and Jade Cutter, I would go for Aquila Favonia. It's much better base attack and physical damage bonus, which is what you want. Now for elemental damage, elemental sub DPS to support, well, the same weapons that are applied to the Anemo character, to the Anemo version of the Traveler apply here. Although now something like the Iron Sting and the Alley Flash just don't work at all. I mean, the Alley Flash sort of, but I think it's there are better choices, like Favoni's Sword, even more energy on top of your other energy, particle generation from the constellations, Festering Desire, because you're spamming the Starfell Sword so much that the crit rate and skill damage are really nice, and energy recharge, of course, it's just good. Sacrificial Sword, not that much, because the Starfell Sword, the skill has a pretty low cooldown on its own, so you don't need the reset. So yeah, there is a lot of selection. Now, if you don't have any gacha weapons, because all of those mentioned are gacha weapons, then you have the Iron Sting or the Prototype Rancor. I would go for, both are okay, but I think the Prototype Rancor is the better choice. Yes, the physical damage bonus isn't that, doesn't really match up with an elemental support or sub DPS, but just stack it, hit 4 times to get the stacks, and then just drop your burst and the skill to just deal some good damage. Again, that's it. That is for the completely free-to-play approach. Not even if somehow you are that unlucky and haven't gotten any of the other swords, like the Favonius Sword or Sacrificial Sword, for the energy recharge. But yeah, that is that for the weapons of the Geo Traveler. Yeah, that's it. Again, the Geo Traveler is good. It's a good kit. it's a good kid, but it does get outshined by basically everyone else. And that's how gacha works, really. I mean, that's how a lot of games, not even gacha, you can say, work. Where they give you your main character and then they give you a whole other cast of characters that just outshine the main character because main character syndrome, I guess. Which brings us actually to why do people just ditch the main character immediately? Almost. I didn't. I actually played throughout the whole story with the main with the like starting party, just because I wanted to see how many primo gems and how many wishes I could get by finishing the story. I just didn't touch the banners at all. But why do people like not really use the MC? Not hate on them. People don't hate the character that much. They are sort of like dead silence. It is a sort of muted main character, as they are called, and that does hurt the main character's reputation because people really just want the MC, the traveler, to have a personality. Instead, they're just dead, dead inside. But the main character doesn't like get hate when it comes to just being there, But with their kit and such, again, they just get outshined by everyone else. But I think that the sort of another reason that people do not use the main character is because of that main character syndrome. Because this traveler is meant to represent the player, and people just don't like that in games. They want to control characters with personality and such. They don't want to really like control themselves. I think that's what happens with the majority of people. There are people that like that. Like they like the self-insert character inside games, but I think that for Genshin Impact, I think a lot of people just prefer other characters compared to this self-insert traveler. And it's this sort of psychological thing where they're like, even if the main character has a okay and interesting kit, they will ignore it because, again, they just don't like themselves inside the game, like fighting, and I guess, which, I mean, you can easily just tell me that's wrong. That's just my opinion of it. And that's also sort of my own reason. I just, I also am of the opinion that I don't like the character being just dead inside. I would like to control someone that can speak, that has their own opinions and such. Even if they have, like, my name, supposedly. Even if I gave them a name, I would like them to have their own thoughts on things. And not just endlessly stare at the abyss. But that's it. I mean, again, as an ending thought, the main character is fine. For a gacha game, I will say they are incredible. Because usually in gacha games, you get just the worst thing as the starter. But with how Genshin Impact works and how like the number of characters, works and things, the traveler, the main character, is perfectly fine. And I think that you can use them. And sort of you should use them, really. If you don't have enough characters for the Spiral Abyss, or if you lack that, if you lack a character that really can move opponents towards where you want them, to group them up, then please do give the Anemo Traveler at least a shot. And if you're struggling with crit rate, with the balancing of crit rate and crit damage on your artifacts for your main DPS, then do consider using the Geo Traveler for that crit rate bonus and slap a Noblesse, a 4-piece Noblesse on them and have an attack boost as well. And yeah, that's it. So we'll be talking, in this series we'll be talking about characters based on the time of acquisition. for my account and, well, for everyone, because now we're gonna be tackling the starter party, which everybody gets. And, well, the first character you get aside from the Traveler is Amber, and people love to hate on Amber, so yeah, she's gonna be next. I have a lot of things to actually say about Amber that aren't bad, so stay tuned, and I'll see you guys then.